end, we will all be praising the wisdom and statesmanship of the American government. And that wasn't ironic. He meant it, you know. And yes, that's the attitude of liberal doves. That's why when U.S. casualties decline in Iraq, you know, people say, well, you know, maybe it really was a success. Okay, killed 1 million people, drove millions out of the country, you know, destroyed the society, left it as a total ruin. Okay, but not too many American casualties, and the big problem is they're not doing what we say. You know, they're not. There is mass nonviolent resistance in Iraq. It's actually a major triumph of nonviolent resistance, has compelled the invaders to back down from their, at least in words, we don't know if they'll live up to it, from their major goals. Okay, but who describes things that way? You know, where can you find a principled criticism? And this is not a critique of the press, because the press are reflecting the educated culture. They're reflecting the mentality of Harvard, MIT, you know, Yale, and so on. That's the culture from which they come. And I think the reporting is very accurate. In fact, a large part of what I've written is actually defense of the press for its professionalism and objectivity. You may know of a book that Edward Herman and I wrote called Manufacturing Consent, which is about the media. There's a lot of condemnation of the book, but nobody looks at it. This is material you're not allowed to look at. It doesn't keep to the party line. But a large part of it, if anybody wants to look at it, is a detailed analysis of media coverage after of the Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive is a crucially important event. And after the Tet Offensive, Freedom House, you know, great defender of freedom, published 2 thick volumes denouncing the press for their lack of patriotism, because they didn't report the Tet Offensive in a manner, you know, glorifying the United States sufficiently. You know, straight out of Stalinist Russia. That's Freedom House. 2 volumes, one of commentary, one of documents. And they claimed the volume of commentary, you know, condemned the press for being on the side of the Viet Cong and hating America and, you know, all the usual stuff. And then there was the volume of documents that's supposed to back it up. Well, you know, I carried out the heinous act of actually reading the documents. The volume of documents completely refuted everything that they said in the volume of commentary, line by line. If you want details, look at the book. We went through it, and we concluded that, contrary to the Freedom House Stalinist-style attack, the press was very courageous, competent, accurate. People described what they said, but entirely within the framework of U.S. doctrine, you know, U.S. propaganda. So, like, everything we're trying to do was right and noble, but, you know, we just had to destroy half the place, because what choice do we have? But it's described accurately. Now, it's interesting that the media hated that defense of their objectivity and professionalism. They would much rather be portrayed the way Freedom House portrayed them in its Stalinist-style attack, as traitors, you know, challenging authority, and so on and so forth. They like that. What they don't like is you're doing your job very competently and courageously, but you're completely subservient to propaganda and the party line. Nobody likes that. So that part of the book can't be read. But yeah, I think it's generally true. And I think those are the reasons. I mean, there are other reasons too, like the media, after all, are big corporations, you know, selling a product, audiences to other corporations. That surely has an effect, and so on. I forget which side.
You've said a lot about sources that you've cited versus propaganda from various governments, and I imagine that a lot of the propaganda is written to look very similar to what you're citing as appropriate sources and to act like facts. And my question is, how do you personally differentiate between facts and facts? Like, how do you decide what you want to trust?
Are you an MIT student?
Yes.
Okay, so you've taken science courses.
Yes.
How do you decide what to believe? I mean, it's the same in this case. You know, you don't believe every paper you see in the journals because some of them don't seem to make sense. And if they don't, you look back and see whether their data are correct and are the sources right. Was the doctor who wrote it in the pay of the drug companies and so on and so forth. Sure, and it's the same here. You just use the normal common sense that you use when you act as a scientist. I mean, it's a little different in the case of public affairs than science. I mean, Mother Nature is a hard taskmistress, but she doesn't purposely put up barriers in the way of understanding, okay, as when you're reading, say, the press or academic work and so on. But it's pretty, on the other hand, it's a lot easier in the case of public affairs because it's all on the surface. You know, there's no theories to speak of. I mean, try to find a theory in international relations theory. What's called a theory is laughable. You read just what's called just war theory. I could go through details if you like, but what it comes down to is I believe. You know, that's the way every argument runs. So it's all on the surface. Everything that I talked about today is on the surface. You can check it. It's just, you know, like bare data. If you don't think it's right, look it up. That's why I continually said verify it. Very simple. You'll find plenty of propaganda, like a couple of examples that I read. But you can also find the facts, and you can make your own mind. It's way easier than in the sciences in that respect, though harder in that you have to overcome barriers. But there's no special tricks. In fact, you know them all if you've taken science courses.
Professor Chomsky, good afternoon. In your opinion, what is the responsibility of the Arab League?
The responsibility of who?
The Arab League. The Arab countries, particularly the neighboring countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and even the oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia. And going back to Lebanon, why do you think Hezbollah hasn't took any firm action yet, either like tactical action or, I mean, they just stuck to speeches? Thank you.
Well, with regard to Hezbollah, I mean, I'm not privy to their internal thinking, but I can guess that the reason they're not reacting is they know if they do, Lebanon gets turned into a charnel house. Remember, Israel has, I'll repeat what I said, armed and air force greater, larger in scale, and technologically more advanced than any NATO power outside the U.S. And if they unleash it against Lebanon, okay. As for the Arab League, they've taken mixed positions. For example, Prince Turki al-Faisal, one of the leading figures in Saudi Arabia, and one of those considered the most moderate, you know, pro-American. He gave a very powerful speech at the Gulf Forum a couple of days ago, in which he bitterly condemned the U.S.-Israeli invasion, said we're all Palestinians now, if we have to martyr ourselves to defend the Palestinians, we should do it. Now, the governments aren't doing much, but exactly what are they supposed to do? I mean, they've got to control their own populations, which is hard. It's one of the reasons the U.S. sends them armaments, tons of armaments. And in fact, Israel has always been regarded as part of the defense of the ruling clerics against their populations. But first of all, they're not inclined to oppose U.S. power because they more or less agree with it for themselves. They have no use for the Palestinians, though the population does. And even if they wanted to do something, there's not much they can do. You know, it's pretty hard to stand up against the Godfather. It is. About the only theory I know of in international relations theory that's not trivial or obviously false is that international relations is very much like the mafia. And the Godfather does not brook disobedience and has plenty of ways of reacting to it. And you take your fate in your hands if you do something like vote in an election the way the master doesn't want, you know, let alone interfere in some fashion. So, you know, I don't like their position at all, but